My name is Nathan, and at 32 I finally achieved my dream of owning my own apartment in Chicago after years of careful saving. I always thought family meant supporting each other through thick and thin, but I never imagined my parents would expect me to risk my financial future for my irresponsible brother. What started as a simple request to co-sign a mortgage turned into a nightmare that threatened everything I had worked for. I still wonder if I made the right choice. Before I share my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to make a difficult choice between family expectations and your own well-being. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in suburban Illinois, about 40 minutes outside of Chicago. My parents, Frank and Martha, worked hard to provide a comfortable life for me and my younger brother, Trevor. Dad was an insurance salesman, and Mom taught third grade at the local elementary school. They instilled in us the value of education and hard work, always telling us that we could achieve anything if we put in the effort. From an early age, it was clear that Trevor and I were different. While I was naturally studious and responsible, Trevor was more interested in having fun and taking shortcuts. In high school, I joined the debate team, took advanced placement classes, and spent weekends studying for the SAT. My efforts paid off when I received a partial scholarship to Northwestern University, where I majored in economics. College was challenging but rewarding. I worked part-time at the university library to cover expenses my scholarship did not. After graduation in 2010, I entered the job market during one of the worst economic periods in recent history. The recession made finding work incredibly difficult, but after dozens of applications, I landed an entry-level position at a financial advisory firm in downtown Chicago. For the first few years, I lived with 3 roommates in a cramped apartment to save money. I took the bus to work every day, packed my lunches, and rarely went out with coworkers for drinks after work. Every dollar I saved went toward my dream of owning my own place. After 5 years of disciplined saving, I had enough for a down payment on a modest 1-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park. It was nothing fancy, about 700 square feet with a small balcony overlooking a quiet street, but it was mine. I remember the day I got the keys, walking around the empty rooms, planning where each piece of furniture would go. That apartment represented everything I had worked for. Meanwhile, Trevor took a very different path. He enrolled in the state university, but dropped out after 3 semesters, claiming college was not for him. Over the next few years, he cycled through various jobs. He tried bartending, but quit because the hours were too demanding. He worked at a car dealership until he had a disagreement with the manager. He started a landscaping business that folded after 1 summer. With each failure, our parents were right there to support him both emotionally and financially. Their pattern of enabling Trevor began in childhood. If we were both assigned chores, my parents would check that mine were completed perfectly while accepting minimal effort from Trevor. If we both needed new shoes for school, I would get the practical option while Trevor got the expensive brand name pair to boost his confidence. When we fought, I was expected to be the bigger person and let things go because Trevor was more sensitive. As adults, this pattern continued. Trevor would call our parents when he was short on rent or needed a new car transmission. They always found a way to help him, even if it meant dipping into their retirement savings. When I expressed concern about this arrangement, they would say I was being selfish and that family helps family. Despite these frustrations, I tried to maintain a good relationship with my parents. I visited for Sunday dinners twice a month, called my mom regularly, and remembered their birthdays and anniversary with thoughtful gifts. I loved them and understood they meant well, even if their actions sometimes seemed unfair. When it came to Trevor, I kept a friendly but somewhat distant relationship. We would chat at family gatherings and occasionally text about sports, but I was careful not to get too involved in his personal life. I had learned from experience that getting close to Trevor often meant getting pulled into his latest crisis or scheme. Just before the events that would change our family dynamic forever, I had received a promotion at work. After 9 years with the same company, I was now a senior financial analyst with a comfortable salary and good benefits. For the first time in my adult life, I felt financially secure. I was even considering saving for a larger place, maybe a 2-bedroom condo where I could have a dedicated home office. What I did not know was that Trevor had been borrowing money from our parents more frequently than I realized. Over the years, he had taken thousands of dollars with vague promises to pay them back once he got on his feet. Of course, that day never came. Trevor had also borrowed money directly from me on 3 occasions, claiming it was for emergencies. The first time he said his car had been towed, and he needed $300 to get it back. The second time he claimed his landlord was threatening eviction if he did not come up with $800 by the end of the week. The third time he asked for $2,000 to cover medical bills after a minor accident. Each time I reluctantly gave him the money, knowing deep down I would never see it again. And each time I swore it would be the last. Little did I know that these small loans were just the beginning, and that the biggest request was yet to come. It was a Tuesday evening in October when I received a text from my mother asking me to come over for dinner the following night. This was unusual since our family dinners typically happened on Sundays. When I asked what the occasion was, she simply replied that they wanted to see me and had something important to discuss. Already I felt a knot forming in my stomach. The next evening, I drove to my parents' suburban home after work, trying to shake the feeling of dread that had been with me all day. When I arrived, I noticed Trevor's car in the driveway, which further raised my suspicions. As soon as I walked through the front door, I sensed the tension in the air. My mother greeted me with a hug that lasted a beat too long. My father gave me a firm handshake and a pat on the back that felt rehearsed. Trevor surprisingly was setting the dining room table, something I had rarely seen him do voluntarily. He gave me a wide smile and asked how my drive over had been. The whole scene felt staged, like everyone was playing a part except me. During dinner, the conversation remained superficial. My mother asked about my job, my father commented on the Chicago Bears' recent game, and Trevor mentioned a new restaurant he had tried. Nobody brought up the important thing they wanted to discuss, which only increased my anxiety. As my mother cleared the dinner plates and brought out coffee and dessert, my father finally cleared his throat and said they had some exciting news to share. Trevor straightened up in his chair and began what sounded like a prepared speech about how he had been reflecting on his life and was ready for a fresh start. He talked about settling down, building equity, and creating stability for his future, terms that sounded suspiciously like they had come from a real estate brochure rather than my brother's spontaneous thoughts. Then came the big reveal: Trevor had found the perfect house. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home in a nice neighborhood about 20 minutes from our parents. As he described the hardwood floors, the spacious backyard, and the renovated kitchen, I noticed my parents nodding encouragingly. Then Trevor mentioned the price, $450,000, and I nearly choked on my coffee. This was a man who had never held a job for more than 8 months, who had credit card debt in the 5 figures, and who regularly borrowed money for basic expenses. How could he possibly afford a house that expensive? The answer came moments later when my father mentioned that Trevor had been pre-approved for a mortgage contingent upon having a co-signer. All 3 of them turned to look at me expectantly. I am sure my face revealed my shock, because my mother quickly jumped in to explain that Trevor's credit score was a bit below the bank threshold. My father added that it was just a formality, that Trevor had a good job now working in sales at his friend company, and that this would be the step he needed to really turn his life around. I sat there stunned into silence. They wanted me, who had just recently managed to buy my own modest apartment after years of saving, to co-sign a 30-year mortgage for a house that was well beyond what Trevor could reasonably afford. The implications were staggering. If Trevor missed payments, my credit would be ruined. If he defaulted entirely, I would be on the hook for the entire loan amount. It could destroy all the financial security I had worked so hard to build. I managed to say that I needed time to think about it, that this was a major decision that could impact my financial future for decades. My mother looked disappointed and my father frowned, but they agreed I should take a day or 2 to consider. Trevor's expression was harder to read, a mixture of hope and entitlement that made me increasingly uncomfortable. As I helped my mother clear the dessert plates in the kitchen, she cornered me by the sink. In a hushed voice, she reminded me how family always comes first, how Trevor just needed this one chance to prove himself, and how she and my father would not be around forever to help him. The implication was clear: eventually Trevor would be my responsibility alone. The drive home that night was filled with anxiety. My mind raced with memories of all the times Trevor had promised to change, to be more responsible, to pay back what he borrowed, only to fall back into the same patterns weeks or months later. I thought about the articles I had read about co-signing loans and the horror stories of ruined credit and damaged relationships. I thought about my own plans for the future, possibly buying a larger place or even taking a year off to travel once I had enough saved. Once home, I stayed up late researching co-signing risks. I read that co-signers are equally responsible for the debt, that late payments affect both parties' credit scores, and that removing yourself as a co-signer once the agreement is signed is nearly impossible. I looked up statistics showing that nearly 40% of co-signers end up paying some or all of the loan themselves, and 75% of co-signers see a negative impact on their relationship with the borrower. The next morning, I reached out to a colleague who specialized in mortgage lending. She confirmed my fears, explaining that co-signing for Trevor would tie up my debt-to-income ratio and likely prevent me from qualifying for another mortgage in the future. She advised strongly against it, saying that banks require co-signers for a reason: they have determined the primary borrower is a high risk. That night I barely slept. I tossed and turned, torn between family loyalty and financial self-preservation. Part of me wanted to help Trevor to believe that this time would be different, that the house would give him the stability he needed. But the rational part of me knew better. This was not a small favor. This was potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars and decades of financial entanglement. By morning, I had made my decision. I would not co-sign the mortgage. It was one of the hardest choices I had ever made, but I knew it was the right one for my future. I arranged to meet my family at a coffee shop near my apartment that Saturday morning. I figured a public place might help keep emotions in check, and meeting on my side of town would allow me to retreat to my apartment afterward if things got tense. I arrived early and chose a table in the corner away from other customers. I had rehearsed what I would say, focusing on the financial realities rather than Trevor's history of irresponsibility. When my parents and Trevor arrived, I could tell from their confident expressions that they assumed I would agree to their plan. We exchanged pleasantries and ordered coffee before I took a deep breath and delivered my prepared speech. I explained that after careful consideration and consultation with financial experts, I could not in good conscience co-sign the mortgage. I outlined the risks involved, how it would affect my ability to qualify for future loans, and the potential damage to my credit score if payments were missed. I emphasized that this was not a personal rejection of Trevor, but a financial decision based on objective factors. The reaction was immediate and intense. Trevor's face flushed red with anger. He accused me of thinking I was better than him, of never believing in him, of always judging him for his past mistakes. My mother burst into tears, saying she never thought I would turn my back on family when we needed me most. My father sat stone-faced, his disappointment radiating across the table. As Trevor's voice rose, other customers began to glance our way. I tried to keep my tone, even explaining that I wanted him to succeed, but that this particular arrangement posed too great a risk to my own financial security. This only seemed to enrage him further. He stood up, knocking his chair backward, and declared that I had always been selfish, that I cared more about money than family. Before storming out, he spat out that he hoped I enjoyed my perfect little life alone. My mother hurried after him, throwing me a hurt look over her shoulder. My father remained seated, staring into his coffee cup. After a moment of uncomfortable silence, he looked up and suggested an alternative. Perhaps Trevor could move into my apartment with me temporarily, while he saved for a more modest home of his own. I could keep the bedroom, and Trevor could sleep on the pull-out couch in the living room. It would only be for 6 months, maybe a year at most. I was speechless. My one-bedroom apartment was barely 700 square feet. The idea of sharing that small space with my brother, who had never respected my boundaries or possessions, was unthinkable. Besides, I knew that temporary arrangements with Trevor had a way of becoming permanent. When I firmly refused this suggestion as well, my father shook his head slowly. In a quiet but cold voice, he said that family obligations went both ways, and that my mother and he had sacrificed much to give me the opportunities that led to my current success. The least I could do was help my brother when he was trying to better himself. He left money for the coffee on the table and walked out without saying goodbye, leaving me alone with the stares of curious onlookers who had witnessed our family drama unfold. For the next 3 days, I heard nothing from my family. No calls, no texts, not even the usual forwarded memes from my mother. The silence was both a relief and a new source of anxiety. Had I permanently damaged my relationship with them? Was this temporary anger, or the beginning of a lasting estrangement? On the fourth day, the messages started. My mother sent long emotional texts about how disappointed she was, how she had raised me to be more compassionate, how Trevor was devastated by my rejection. She reminded me of times when the family had supported me conveniently, forgetting that I had worked my way through college and never asked them for financial help as an adult. Then came a call from my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister. She asked why I was abandoning my brother when he was trying to get his life together. It became clear that my parents had shared their version of events with the extended family, casting me as the villain who refused to help Trevor out of pure selfishness. The stress began affecting my work. I missed a deadline on an important report and found myself unable to focus during meetings. My boss noticed and asked if everything was okay. I gave a vague answer about family issues, embarrassed to admit the full situation. That weekend I met with my friend Marcus for lunch. He had known me since college and had witnessed many of Trevor's previous crises from afar. When I explained the current situation, he did not hesitate to validate my decision. "What your parents are asking is completely unreasonable," he said. "Co-signing a mortgage is not like lending someone $20. It is a massive financial commitment that could follow you for decades. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, even if that someone is your brother." His words were reassuring, but I still felt the weight of my family disappointment. And it was about to get much heavier. The following week, I began receiving calls and messages from various family members and family friends. My cousin Ryan wanted to know why I was being so hard on Trevor. My parents' neighbor, who had known us since childhood, called to say she was surprised at my lack of family loyalty. My mother's best friend sent a Facebook message suggesting I reconsider my position for my mother's sake, as she was beside herself with worry about Trevor's future. It became clear that my parents were actively recruiting people to pressure me. They were sharing a narrative that painted Trevor as a victim of my selfishness, rather than a 30-year-old man facing the consequences of his own choices. Each call and message chipped away at my resolve, making me question whether I was in fact being unreasonable. The next week brought an escalation I had not anticipated. The calls and messages from family members continued increasing in both frequency and intensity. My Uncle Bob, my brother, called to tell me that family should always come first and that money should never come between blood relatives. My cousin Sarah sent a lengthy email recounting all the times Trevor had spoken highly of me, implying I was betraying his admiration and love. Meanwhile, Trevor had taken to social media. While never mentioning me by name, he posted vague statements about people who claim to care about you but abandon you when you need them most. He shared inspirational quotes about overcoming betrayal and finding strength when those closest to you let you down. Each post gathered sympathetic comments from friends and family, further cementing the narrative that I was the villain in this story. The situation reached a new low on Wednesday when my parents showed up unannounced at my workplace. I was in a meeting when my assistant messaged me that my parents were waiting in the lobby and insisting on seeing me. I excused myself, mortified that my family drama was now invading my professional life. When I reached the lobby, my father was pacing while my mother sat rigidly on a visitor chair. As soon as they saw me, they approached my father's face set in determination. "We need to talk about this ridiculous situation," he said, his voice carrying across the lobby. Several of my colleagues glanced over curiously. I tried to guide my parents toward the exit, suggesting we could discuss this after work, but my father refused to budge. "Your brother is about to lose his apartment because you will not help him," he said loudly. "Is that what you want? For your own brother to be homeless while you live comfortably?" I was acutely aware of the receptionist and security guard watching this unfold. In a low, firm voice, I told my parents that this was my workplace and that I would not discuss personal matters here. My father continued to argue until the security guard approached and asked if everything was all right. Humiliated, I assured him it was a family matter and finally managed to usher my parents outside. The next day, I was called into a meeting with the Human Resources Director. She explained diplomatically that while the company understood personal issues occasionally spilled into professional settings, yesterday's incident had been disruptive. She suggested I might want to take a personal day to sort things out. It was not a reprimand, but the message was clear: do not let this happen again. That evening I listened to a voicemail from my mother. Through tears, she claimed that Trevor landlord had given him 30 days' notice to vacate his apartment due to multiple late rent payments. She said he would have nowhere to go and might end up sleeping in his car, and it would be my fault for refusing to help when I had the means to do so. I had always joined my family for Sunday dinner twice a month, a tradition that dated back to when I first moved to Chicago. This Sunday, for the first time in years, I did not go. I could not face the combined pressure and guilt from my parents, nor the angry glares from Trevor. Instead, I stayed home, ignored their calls, and tried to enjoy a quiet day to myself. It felt strange and somewhat sad, but also necessary for my mental health. On Monday, a mutual friend called to check on me. He revealed that Trevor had been telling people that I had promised to help him buy a house, but had backed out at the last minute, leaving him in a desperate situation. This was a complete fabrication, but it explained why some friends had been giving me strange looks and making comments about keeping promises. Through this friend, I also learned something Trevor had not disclosed to me or our parents. When asking for my help, he had significant gambling debts. Apparently, he had been frequenting casinos and online poker sites for years, accumulating losses in the tens of thousands of dollars. This revelation confirmed that my instinct to refuse co-signing had been correct. Trevor's financial problems went far beyond what a new house could solve. Later that week, Trevor's girlfriend Lisa called me directly. We had met only a few times at family gatherings and had never spoken one-on-one before. She pleaded with me to reconsider, saying that Trevor was really trying to change and that having a stable home would help him overcome his gambling habit. When I asked why she did not co-sign for the mortgage herself, she admitted that her credit was even worse than Trevor. This did nothing to inspire confidence in their joint financial future. The pressure campaign reached a surreal peak when I returned home from work one evening to find Trevor sitting on the steps outside my building, 2 large suitcases beside him. When he saw me, he stood up and announced that our parents had told him he could stay with me until he found a new place. He had not consulted me about this plan, nor had my parents. I firmly told him he could not stay with me. This led to a heated argument on my doorstep, loud enough that my neighbor Mrs. Thompson opened her door to check what was happening. Trevor accused me of wanting him to be homeless, of never caring about him, of always thinking I was too good for my own family. I maintained that he was an adult responsible for his own housing, and that showing up unannounced with luggage was inappropriate and manipulative. Eventually, Trevor called our father to come pick him up, but not before threatening that I would regret my decision. As he waited for our father to arrive, he sat on his suitcase, staring at me with such hatred that I retreated into my apartment and locked the door. The weeks of constant pressure and confrontation began to take a toll on my mental and physical health. I had trouble sleeping, lost my appetite, and found it difficult to concentrate at work. I began to isolate myself, declining invitations from friends, and avoiding places where I might run into family members or mutual acquaintances. The narrative that I was a selfish, family-abandoning villain had spread so widely that I felt judged wherever I went. Around this time, I received a disturbing call from my mother. In a cold, formal tone, unlike her usual emotional pleas, she informed me that my father and she had decided to revise their will. If I continued to refuse to help Trevor, I would be removed as a beneficiary. While I had never counted on an inheritance and was financially independent, the threat still stung. It represented a final weaponization of my parents' resources in their campaign to make me comply. Adding to my stress, I began noticing Trevor's car parked on my street several times that week. He never approached me, but his presence felt threatening, as if he was surveilling my comings and goings. I considered reporting this to the police, but hesitated, unable to bring myself to file a report against my own brother. Then came the anonymous complaints to my building management about noise from my apartment during hours when I was not even home, about unauthorized guests, about alleged lease violations. I could not prove Trevor was behind these complaints, but the timing was suspicious. It seemed he was attempting to create problems with my housing situation as revenge for my refusal to help with his. Feeling increasingly overwhelmed, I sought professional help. I began seeing a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and boundary setting. A doctor. Collins helped me understand that what I was experiencing was a form of emotional blackmail, and that my parents' enabling of Trevor had created an unhealthy family system. She validated my right to protect my financial well-being and helped me develop strategies for responding to the continued pressure. As the weeks passed, I found strength in unexpected places. My friend Marcus remained steadfastly supportive, often checking in and providing a sounding board when I needed to vent. Several colleagues who had witnessed my parents' workplace visit expressed sympathy and shared their own stories of difficult family dynamics. Even my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, after hearing Trevor outburst, stopped me in the hallway to say she thought I was handling a tough situation with remarkable restraint. This growing support network helped me weather the storm, but the worst confrontation was yet to come. Despite my reservations, I agreed to attend my father's 60th birthday dinner. I could not bring myself to miss such an important milestone, and part of me hoped that the public setting and celebratory occasion would prevent any discussion of the ongoing conflict. I was wrong. I arrived at the restaurant to find my extended family already seated around a large table. My parents greeted me coolly, and Trevor barely acknowledged my presence. As I made my way to the only empty seat, I noticed several large duffel bags and suitcases piled near my parents' car in the parking lot, visible through the restaurant window. A sense of dread washed over me. Throughout dinner, conversation flowed around me but rarely included me. I made polite small talk with my aunts and uncles, carefully avoiding any mention of the tension between my immediate family and me. As dessert was served and my father opened his gifts, I began to think I might escape the evening without incident. Then, as people were finishing their coffee, my mother announced that they had something to tell everyone. She explained that Trevor was going through a difficult time and would be staying with them temporarily. Then she looked directly at me and added that after dinner, Trevor would follow me home and stay in my apartment for a while, as it was closer to his new job. I was stunned. We had never discussed this arrangement. When I started to object, my father cut me off, saying it was already decided. My aunt nodded approvingly, commenting on how nice it was that I was finally helping my brother. It became clear that my parents had already told everyone that I had agreed to this plan. Before I could respond, my mother casually mentioned that she still had the spare key I had given her for emergencies, and that Trevor could use that to get in if our schedules did not align. This revelation sent a chill through me. The key was meant for true emergencies, not for giving my brother unauthorized access to my home. I stood up my chair, scraping loudly against the floor. In a voice that shook slightly with anger, I stated clearly that Trevor would not be staying with me, that I had never agreed to such an arrangement, and that I expected my mother to return my spare key immediately. The table fell silent. Then Trevor stood up as well, his face contorted with rage. He revealed that his landlord had not just given him notice, he had already been evicted for non-payment of rent. He had nowhere to go, and it was my fault for not helping him when I could have. My father joined the fray, admitting something they had concealed before they had co-signed for Trevor twice in the past, once for a car loan and once for a previous apartment. Both times had ended in disaster, with Trevor defaulting on payments, and my parents having to cover thousands of dollars to protect their own credit. This was why they wanted me to step in this time. They simply could not afford to take another financial hit. The conversation escalated into a full-blown argument. My father issued an ultimatum: either I helped Trevor by letting him stay with me, or I would no longer be welcome in the family. My mother began crying. Other family members chose sides, and the restaurant manager approached to ask us to keep our voices down. I looked around the table at the faces of my family, some angry, some tearful, some uncomfortable, and made my decision. I placed money on the table for my portion of the meal, apologized to my father for missing the remainder of his birthday celebration, and walked out. My hands shook so badly on the drive home that I had to pull over once to collect myself. My breathing was shallow, my heart racing, and I recognized I was having a panic attack. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, practicing the calming techniques my therapist had taught me before continuing home. When I arrived at my apartment building, my worst fears were confirmed. Trevor was already there, standing in the lobby with a key in his hand, the spare key my mother had given him. Seeing me, he smirked and said, "Mom said you might try to back out, so she gave me this just in case." I told him firmly that he was not welcome to stay, and that using the key without my permission would constitute breaking and entering. He laughed and pushed past me, heading for the elevator. I followed, increasingly panicked at the thought of him entering my private space against my will. When we reached my floor, I found he had already used the key to open my apartment door. Inside, he had dropped his backpack on my couch and was opening my refrigerator as if he lived there. When I demanded he leave immediately, he refused, saying our parents had given him permission to stay. What followed was a physical confrontation I never could have anticipated. When I tried to take my key back from him, Trevor shoved me against the wall. I pushed back defensively, and he grabbed a framed photo from my shelf and threw it at me. The glass shattered on the floor as I ducked. The noise prompted my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, to knock on the door, asking if everything was all right. When I opened the door, she saw the broken glass and Trevor's aggressive stance, and immediately called building security. Trevor continued to insist he had a right to be there, that our parents had given him permission, that I was the one causing problems. The building security guard arrived and asked to see identification and proof of residency. I showed my driver license with my address and explained that Trevor was not a tenant or invited guest. Trevor argued that he had a key, which meant I had given him permission. The guard, uncertain of how to proceed in what appeared to be a family dispute, called the building manager. While waiting for the manager to arrive, my parents showed up, having followed Trevor to my apartment after the disastrous dinner. They joined Trevor's side, insisting that as my family, they had every right to decide that Trevor could stay with me. My father accused the security guard of overstepping by interfering in a family matter. The building manager, Mr. Ramirez, arrived and quickly assessed the situation. He explained that according to my lease, I could not have someone move in without adding them to the agreement, and that all residents required background and credit checks. When my father argued that Trevor was just visiting, Mr. Ramirez pointed to the suitcases and duffel bags now piled in my hallway and raised an eyebrow skeptically. Trevor became increasingly agitated as it became clear that the building staff were not going to allow him to stay. He began shouting that I was dead to him, that I would regret this, that I was no longer his brother. My mother alternated between tearfully pleading with me to reconsider and angrily accusing me of cruelty. The scene in the hallway had drawn several neighbors out of their apartments. People I had lived alongside for years were witnessing this humiliating family meltdown. Some looked on with undisguised curiosity, while others retreated back into their apartments, uncomfortable with the display. Finally, Mr. Ramirez stated firmly that if Trevor did not leave voluntarily, he would have no choice but to call the police. At the mention of law enforcement, my father finally relented. He told Trevor to gather his things, shooting me a look of profound disappointment as he did so. As Trevor collected his bags, he deliberately knocked over a small table in my entryway, sending my keys, mail, and a potted plant crashing to the floor. No one in my family apologized for the damage or the disturbance. They left as a unit a solid front against me, the outsider. After they were gone, Mr. Ramirez helped me clean up the broken glass and soil. He advised me to change my locks first thing in the morning and to document the incident in case there were further problems. Then, seeing how shaken I was, he asked if I had somewhere else I could stay for the night. I called Marcus, briefly explained what had happened, and he immediately offered his couch. I packed an overnight bag, thanked Mr. Ramirez and Mrs. Thompson for their help, and left my violated apartment behind, uncertain when I would feel safe there again. The morning after the confrontation at my apartment, I called in sick to work and met with an attorney recommended by Marcus. Miss Patel specialized in family law and had experience with harassment cases. As I recounted the events of the past weeks, culminating in the previous night invasion of my home, she took detailed notes and asked clarifying questions. After hearing the full story, Miss Patel did not mince words. "What you are describing is harassment, unauthorized entry, and potentially stalking," she said. "The fact that the perpetrators are your family members does not make their actions legal or acceptable." She outlined my options. I could file for a restraining order against Trevor, which would legally prohibit him from coming near me, my home, or my workplace. I could send a cease and desist letter to my parents regarding their harassment and enabling of Trevor behavior. And most immediately, I needed to change my locks and install some basic security measures. I was hesitant to take legal action against my own family, but Miss Patel gently pointed out that they had already crossed several legal and ethical boundaries. A restraining order would not just protect me, she explained, but would also create an official record of the harassment should things escalate further. By the end of our consultation, I had decided to proceed with both the restraining order against Trevor and the cease and desist letter to my parents. Miss Patel began the paperwork immediately, and I left her office feeling simultaneously relieved to be taking action and sad that it had come to this. My next stop was a locksmith. I arranged to have all the locks in my apartment changed that afternoon. The locksmith, a grandfatherly man named Joe, did not ask questions but offered some sympathetic nods as he worked. He also suggested I install a simple security camera that would alert my phone if anyone approached my door. I took his advice and ordered one online before leaving. Back at work the following day, I met with my building manager to discuss the security breach. Mr. Ramirez was understanding and documented the incident in the building records. He assured me that security had been instructed to be on the lookout for Trevor and to call the police immediately if he attempted to enter the building again. I provided a recent photo of Trevor from social media to help them identify him. A week later, I received an unsettling notification from my credit monitoring service. There had been several inquiries on my credit report from mortgage companies and auto lenders. I had not applied for any loans, which meant someone might be using my information without authorization. Given the timing and circumstances, I suspected Trevor. I immediately contacted my bank and credit card companies to place fraud alerts on all my accounts. I spent hours on the phone with various financial institutions explaining the situation and requesting additional security measures. The bank representative suggested I schedule an in-person meeting to discuss further safeguards, which I did for the following day. At the bank, I learned that someone had indeed attempted to open a credit card using my social security number and address, but had been denied due to verification issues. The bank froze my accounts and issued new cards with enhanced security features. They also advised me to file a police report for the attempted fraud. Filing the police report was one of the hardest things I had ever done. Providing evidence that my own brother had likely attempted to steal my identity felt like the ultimate betrayal of family loyalty. But as the officer taking my statement pointed out, I was not the one who had betrayed the relationship. Around this time, the cease and desist letter was delivered to my parents, and Trevor was served with papers for the restraining order hearing. The response was swift and furious. My mother left a voicemail full of sobbing accusations about tearing the family apart with lawyers and legal threats. My father sent a terse email stating that he never thought his son would use the legal system against his own blood. Extended family members began taking sides more explicitly. My father's sister called to tell me I was breaking my mother's heart, and that legal action was an excessive response to what was just a family disagreement. My brother, however, reached out unexpectedly to offer support. Uncle Mike revealed that he had experienced similar pressure from my parents years ago, when my father had financial troubles and had tried to leverage family relationships to solve his problems. This revelation was both validating and illuminating. It suggested a pattern in my family that preceded Trevor and me, a dynamic of entitlement and obligation that had been normalized over generations. Uncle Mike introduced me to my cousin Parker, who had also resisted family financial entanglements and faced similar backlash. The three of us formed an impromptu support group sharing strategies for maintaining boundaries while weathering the emotional storm of family disapproval. Meanwhile, Trevor's life continued to unravel, and predictably, I was blamed for each new setback. When he lost his job 2 weeks after our confrontation, my parents claimed it was because the stress of my legal action had affected his work performance. When he could not find a new apartment due to his eviction history and poor credit, it was because I had selfishly refused to help him when he needed it most. The next attempt to manipulate me came in the form of a compromise offered by my parents. They would pay 70% of Trevor rent for a new apartment if I contributed the remaining 30% each month. It was presented as a reasonable solution, a way for the family to come together to help Trevor without placing the entire burden on any one person. I declined, firmly pointing out that subsidizing Trevor housing would not address the underlying issues of financial irresponsibility and entitlement. I suggested instead that they use that money to help him get financial counseling and treatment for his gambling problem, but my suggestion was dismissed as unhelpful and judgmental. My refusal of this compromise plan was the last straw for my parents. My father sent a brief cold email stating that until I was ready to take responsibility as a member of the family, I was no longer welcome in their home. My mother, typically the more emotional and conciliatory of the two, did not reach out at all, a silence more painful than her previous tearful pleas. I brought this latest development to my therapy sessions with Dr. Collins. We discussed the concept of family estrangement and the grief that comes with it, even when the separation is necessary for one's mental health and well-being. She helped me see that my parents' actions, while painful, reflected their own unresolved issues and inability to set healthy boundaries with Trevor, rather than any failure on my part. As the weeks passed, I focused on rebuilding my sense of security and well-being. I took a week of vacation from work to rest and process everything that had happened. My boss, now aware of the basic outlines of the situation, was surprisingly supportive, acknowledging that personal crises sometimes require time and space to manage. The restraining order against Trevor was granted after a hearing at which he did not appear. The judge reviewed the evidence, including the police report for attempted identity theft, witness statements from my neighbors about the confrontation and documentation of the repeated, unwanted contact. The order prohibited Trevor from coming within 500 feet of me, my home, or my workplace for 1 year. With the legal protections in place and my home secured with new locks and a camera, I began to feel safer. But the emotional wound of family estrangement remained raw. The approaching holiday season, usually a time of family gatherings, loomed as a painful reminder of all I had lost in standing up for myself. Thanksgiving came, the first major holiday since the estrangement. Instead of the traditional dinner at my parents' house, I accepted an invitation from Marcus and his girlfriend to join their celebration. They had also invited several other friends without local family, creating a warm, chosen family atmosphere that was both different from and reminiscent of the family gatherings of my past. As I helped prepare side dishes in Marcus' kitchen, I found myself sharing stories about past Thanksgivings with my family, remembering the good times, as well as the tensions. There was a bittersweetness to these memories, a recognition that even flawed family relationships had provided connection and belonging that I now had to find elsewhere. The day after Thanksgiving, traditionally spent decorating for Christmas with my mother, I decided to create new traditions for myself. I bought a small tree for my apartment and decorated it with ornaments that reflected my own tastes and experiences rather than family history. I made plans to volunteer at a local food bank on Christmas Eve and accepted an invitation to a New Year Eve party with colleagues. Step by step, I was building a life defined by my own choices rather than family expectations. Throughout this period, I maintained contact with Uncle Mike and Cousin Parker, finding comfort in connecting with family members who understood and respected my boundaries. Through them, I occasionally received news about my parents and Trevor, learning that Trevor had moved in with my parents indefinitely and that they were helping him apply for government assistance programs. While I worried about the long-term sustainability of this arrangement, I recognized it was no longer my problem to solve. By the time Christmas arrived, I had developed a new perspective on family relationships. I understood that true support meant encouraging independence and responsibility, not enabling dependency and entitlement. I saw that my parents, despite their flaws, were acting out of love for Trevor, however, misguided their methods. And I recognized that my love for my family did not require sacrificing my financial security or submitting to emotional manipulation. This understanding did not erase the pain of estrangement, but it allowed me to hold it with greater compassion for everyone involved, including myself. 6 months after the confrontation at my apartment, life had settled into a new normal. The restraining order against Trevor remained in effect, and there had been no further attempts at contact from him. My parents and I had exchanged brief formal messages regarding practical matters like my grandmother's 80th birthday, but our relationship remained distant and strained. My career had recovered from the period of distraction and stress. In fact, I had recently been given responsibility for a major new client account, a vote of confidence from my supervisors that validated my renewed focus and commitment. My financial situation was stable and I was back on track with my long-term savings goals. The apartment that had been the center of so much conflict now felt fully mine again. The new security measures had restored my sense of safety, and I had rearranged the furniture and redecorated several rooms, symbolically reclaiming the space. The broken picture frame from the confrontation had been replaced with a new one containing a photo of my chosen family friends who had supported me through the crisis. Through Uncle Mike, I occasionally received updates about Trevor. After several months of living with our parents, he had found a room to rent in a shared house. The rent was modest enough that he could afford it with his new job at a warehouse. My parents were still providing some financial support, but on a much smaller scale than before. Most surprisingly, Trevor had apparently begun attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings, a small but significant step toward addressing one of his underlying issues. My parents had also made some changes. According to Uncle Mike, they had started seeing a family therapist initially to deal with their grief over the estrangement from me, but gradually exploring their role in enabling Trevor behavior. While I was cautiously hopeful about these developments, I maintained my boundaries knowing that meaningful change would take time and consistency to prove itself. My relationship with the extended family had evolved in unexpected ways. Some relatives who had initially condemned my actions now reached out with tentative understanding, having witnessed more of Trevor behavior or having heard more details about the situation. Others remained firmly aligned with my parents, maintaining that family loyalty should supersede all other considerations. I accepted both reactions with equanimity, no longer seeking universal approval for my choices. The support network I had built during the crisis had strengthened and expanded. Marcus and I had grown even closer, our friendship deepened by the trust I had placed in him during my most vulnerable moments. My neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, now regularly invited me for coffee, our relationship having evolved from polite hallway greetings to genuine friendship after she had witnessed and helped during the confrontation. Even my colleagues who had seen glimpses of the family drama when my parents appeared at the office had become more than just professional associates. Therapy continued to be an important part of my healing process. Dr. Collins and I had shifted from crisis management to deeper exploration of family patterns and the development of healthier relationship templates. I was learning to recognize the early warning signs of boundary violations and to respond assertively without guilt or defensiveness. One of the most valuable lessons I had learned was about the nature of financial boundaries in relationships. I now had clear internal guidelines about when and how I would lend money, what kinds of financial entanglements I would consider, and how to discuss these matters openly before problems arose. These principles extended beyond family to friendships and romantic relationships, creating clarity where there had once been uncomfortable ambiguity. I had also gained a new appreciation for the concept of chosen family. While the bonds of blood had provided my first experience of belonging, I now recognized that mutual respect, shared values, and reciprocal support were the true foundations of meaningful relationships. The friends who had stood by me during the family crisis had demonstrated these qualities in ways that some of my biological relatives had not. The process of forgiveness was ongoing and complex. I was working on forgiving my parents for their role in the conflict, understanding that their actions stemmed from their own fears and limitations rather than malice. I was learning to forgive Trevor not to excuse his behavior, but to free myself from the burden of resentment. And perhaps most challenging, I was learning to forgive myself for the guilt I still sometimes felt about enforcing boundaries with my family. Moving forward, I had developed clearer expectations for what reconciliation might look like if it ever became possible. I would need to see consistent respect for my boundaries, acknowledgement of the harm that had been done, and concrete changes in behavior rather than just apologetic words. Until those conditions were met, I would maintain the distance necessary for my well-being, while leaving the door open a crack for a transformed relationship in the future. As summer arrived, bringing with it the anniversary of the initial mortgage request that had triggered the whole ordeal, I found myself reflecting on the fundamental lesson of the experience. True family support means encouraging independence and responsibility, not enabling dependency through financial entanglements. Real love empowers others to stand on their own, rather than creating permanent dependency. In the end, I found peace in knowing I had made difficult but necessary choices to protect my financial future and mental health. While the cost had been high in terms of family relationships, The alternative would have been a lifetime of boundary violations and escalating demands. By standing firm, I had not only preserved my own well-being, but had potentially created the conditions for my family to develop healthier dynamics in the long run. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between family expectations and your own well-being? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this experience resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe to my channel for more stories about navigating complicated family dynamics. And if you know someone who might be struggling with similar boundary issues, share this video with them to let them know they are not alone. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and others, is to set clear, firm boundaries.